Hello and welcome to our episode of FinTech Focus TV with me, Toby. We are here in the studio with one of the great minds in AI. It's Sid from FinSt AI.
Great to meet you, Toby. Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you, and thanks for the kind words, and thanks for having me on.
Well, listen, this is a subject which I've said before is one of my favourite subjects. It's one of the most topical, as I was saying.
Yes.
We've both been through the event season over the last couple of weeks. There isn't an event you'll go to at the moment without AI. There isn't a room probably in the country at the moment that's got a professional, particularly in financial services, where there's not someone having a conversation about the concepts and the potential of AI within it. You're at the forefront of that. We've just been talking beforehand about your stellar CV thus far, which is hence the reason for one of the great minds in the space. 15 months in now, you're doing stuff which is really exciting within this sort of space. So I'm looking forward to doing this. I'm looking forward to getting under the covers of what's really happening beyond the hype in AI at the moment in financial services. It's exactly where you're locked into. So we've got a great episode lined up today. Yeah. So let's start, as we always do, with some introductions. Sid, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and then how you've arrived here at the moment at FinSt AI and what you guys are doing.
Would love to, and thanks for having me. So I'm Sid Jayakumar, founder of FinSt AI. 15 months, as you mentioned, started the company in 2023. My background's kind of always been in the AI space in many ways. So actually started my career on the financial services side in Morgan Stanley very briefly, but spent the bulk of it at Google DeepMind. I was there for 7 years as an engineer and then researcher, and then my last role was a little bit more of kind of a manager and thinking more about the kind of applied side of it.
This is a great place to start as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it feels like a lifetime ago in many ways. So
that was startup for you, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, when I joined in 2016, DeepMind had just been acquired by Google. AI was still, in many ways, a kind of blue sky dream.
Yeah.
Things like ChatGPT were not on the horizon. People would talk about this idea of being able to talk and communicate with AI, but it felt very far-fetched even for somebody working in it. And sort of cut to 5-6 years later, I was lucky enough to work on a lot of the foundational LLM technologies and things that became Gopher and Gemini and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So my remit and the remit of the company generally moved from how do we build these fundamental foundational technologies to how do you actually build them into useful products for other people. And I think with my kind of personal bent and start of my career in financial services, especially in the last year and post ChatGPT, that was a lot of what was going through my head, was saying we're now at the point where, even a few years prior to that, if you'd said to somebody, hey, I want to automate a bunch of manual tasks that bankers and researchers do, and if you were budgeting it, you need to say, well, I need 50 million to train my model, and I need 20 million to hire all of these people from OpenAI and DeepMind, and this is how I'm going to build it. It's going to be a 3-year project. Suddenly it went to, well, there's open source models out there, there's tools and technologies available, we can really focus and do that in a lean way and build a company here and sell a product. So I was really passionate about actually building useful products, not just selling the dream of tech to these organizations. And I think financial services in general, and our focus is more on the public equity side and asset management and kind of ECM teams and banking. If you look at the work they do, but you also look at how AI might transform that, and this is aside from kind of Finsta specific, but just generally, they're the biggest champions internally themselves in a way. They know there's tasks they do that are really value add and revenue generating, and there's tasks they do that are kind of more repetitive, and they're doing this all the time. And if there was just some intelligent way to automate it, they would do it, but that hasn't happened yet. And I think that's where we really saw the opportunity for Finsta. So we're selling into, we can't necessarily talk about specific customers as yet, but tier one asset managers and investment banks in London and New York, and really selling them a full stack solution. So we're not coming in and saying, oh, if you buy this, then we'll build this for you. We're saying we've built the solution, put this in front of your bankers. They can ask you questions. They can get it to generate drafts of reports. They can, interrogate it the way they would an intern or a junior analyst, and it will do at least 80% of that work back. And it's very, very use case specific on, okay, if you spend X amount of time drafting a pitch deck or a CIM or a memo or an ESG note. Here's how much time you will save there. And so it's really
clear,
fun.
isn't it? Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I think what I found really interesting is being very, very people and product focused, right?
Yeah.
Like when you go in, you can tell them all these things about, well, when I was at DeepMind, I did this, and this is what the models do, but that's not the business there. And they're in, I've got to meet a client, I've got to get work done, tell me how this will save me time or make me more money.
Yeah, it's a different viewpoint, isn't it?
And so we pride ourselves on building great tech, but the tech is only useful if it actually drives use cases and drives value in those firms.
Yeah, and talk to me about the adoption of that, because there's two things in my mind. Number one is no one wants to be left behind in it. Everyone wants to be more efficient and productive at the moment. So it becomes an easy sell on the surface of all that sort of thing if you can prove it. But the second side of things is we're in a risk-averse industry.
Absolutely.
And we're in an industry as well that has procurement that can quite often strangle innovation within the space and take businesses that are 15 months old and take 24 months to actually get them into the company. So tell me about that sort of startup journey. You've had some really impressive backing so far, some great funding, et cetera. Doesn't sound like that's slowing down for you as well. So tell me a little bit about that sort of side of the journey.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because if you'd asked me kind of challenges, that's where I would have started, right? That's the sort of double-edged sword with financial services. One is this huge appetite, as you said. People know they want to, one, not be left behind, as you say, and be doing the thing that will drive most value. But on one hand, as you say, there's procurement and there's compliance and there's risk, but then there's also regulation, which is struggling to keep up with how do you regulate the use of AI, how do you regulate the tech? And I think the UK has actually been very good on this, as opposed to some of the laws that have been passed in the EU that hinder startups often, or can do. So I think what we found is, one, the banks, especially the large banks and asset managers, are often viewed as, well, don't go and try and sell to them at the start, because as you said, you'll get stuck in a 24-month cycle. But what we actually found is that often they've really sensed the message now. And the lessons they've learned in the last 10 years, from whether that was cloud adoption or whether that was crypto or whatever, they know that they can't be left behind, so they're actually very willing to listen.
That's a really interesting point, and not one that's been raised on the show before. We had lots of conversations around this, but cloud adoption actually is that sort of case study for what's happened beforehand, and how this is something I've definitely said on the show before. Is that I think it took the pandemic for financial services to really adopt the cloud. And that's you think about it. How long? When did I first start stumbling over the cloud? 2002 maybe, 3, and then all of a sudden, everyone was talking about it, and you could see it, evolving more and more. But there was still just this frustrating reticence from financial services. COVID came in, cloud suddenly became the savior. Everyone realized, actually, oh Christ, this can do it. This can do some amazing stuff for us. And I worry sometimes about the adoption. Same you can probably say with data. If you separate data from AI and work out how retailers, for example, has flown ahead with its use of data, which I think financial services lagged behind. I think this is a time now where if financial services can really learn those lessons and push ahead, it can be truly transformational. Absolutely. In a really exciting way, and I'm guessing that's where you're sat, right?
Yeah, and that's the hope, right? I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think, one, they're being, as I said, a lot more open to the ecosystem and trying to figure out what's out there. I think the second thing is, in many ways, a lot of the institutions, without naming names, have been very well prepared from some perspectives. So, if you think about, to take a very different approach. If you think about like a large consumer goods FMCG enterprise, there would have been no investment in AI there over the last decade or whatever. And so they've suddenly gone, we need to go out and find how we do this. But if you're a bank, chances are, before ChatGPT, you already had a large team of machine learning engineers and AI researchers on staff. And so one, you're slightly better prepared. I think the other thing is a lot of these banks have spent the time to figure out what are the actual use cases they care about. So, I was at a breakfast this morning with a bunch of kind of execs within innovation teams and the business side and in banks, and they said, for them, it all comes from the use cases. And so the moment you see this wave happening, they've got this long list of what are the use cases that will be most impacted in the front office, middle office, and back office. And for some of them, we're not the right person to build it for them, and we don't want to. If there's a very internal customer support workflow where you as the bank have all the data, and you have the customers and you have the tech, then you're going to be the most efficient at building out that solution yourself with your in-house tech teams. There's other solutions, what we're trying to sell in, for example, and saying, look, these are very front office banking tasks. A lot of it is external data. It's working with the market data firms. It's cleaning the data and, getting agents to look at it and kind of analyze it for you, where there's actually very little risk of internal data leaking. Because if it's a publicly listed company and we're analyzing their filings, we're not expecting you to put in all of your internal data there. So from a compliance point of view, we can make it much easier, but also it's a lot more efficient for us to build this. And so, maybe buying is a higher ROI than you building it yourself. And those are the kinds of arguments we're making. But I think there is, what's a big factor here is that for any technology to really be adopted, you need the business side first and foremost to be convinced, right? You need, if you're trying to sell to the investment bank, you want the MDs in investment banking to say, yes, we need this.
Yeah.
And I think I think the amount, 100 million users for ChatGPT in 3 months or whatever, you've got all these analysts and bankers sitting at home using it for their personal tasks, going, this is the real deal.
Yeah.
There is more to this. It's not just hype.
Yeah.
Why can't I do this at work?
Yeah.
And so they're really pushing that through the organization.
Yeah.
You have people like Jamie Dimon making public statements about this is how much we're going to invest in AI. This is what it's going to do. Goldman Sachs recently said, we can fill S1s in this much quicker with AI. And so you've got real management buy-in all the way from the top, which makes our job slightly easier.
So the management buy-in is something which I absolutely agree with, and I think it's interesting because AI has got these various different things working for it. So there's the well-worn conversation about will it take my job, etc.
Yeah.
But there's the obvious bit there about jobs being replaced. But then there's also the counter argument about it's not about replacing jobs, it's about augmenting jobs, right? And this comes back to what we were talking about before we came on air about the ability here for us to actually use something there which is crying out, which the banks are crying out for, every industry is crying out for at the moment, which isn't just about efficiency and cost reduction, because there's only so much you can reduce costs, full stop, to maintain it. And with inflation and everything moving up, there is only so much cost reduction that can happen in an organisation before you kill it, full stop. And I love the expression, you can't cut your way to growth, because that seems to be something there which is becoming more and more apparent as companies try and scale back to move forward. So it comes down to productivity and how can we put ourselves in the position to be productive. Now you mentioned a hype earlier on, and I think people's concern about AI is there is an awful lot of hype around it. And what does that actually look like? So, and you mentioned use cases beforehand, and people talking about all these different areas of where the use cases are happening in my institution, my bank, or whatever it is like that. A lot of posturing, a lot of chest thumping, etc., etc. But actually, where it comes into action and how people are winning is really interesting to me. So if we move beyond the hype to say, right, what's actually happening at the moment and where people are winning, and what are the potential or the actual gains in productivity at the moment that you're seeing on the ground at the moment. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just to start with a point on the hype that you made, I think the hype is there for a reason, because there's substance behind it, as you say, and so people get excited by it. I think the thing that is the flip side of the hype is, there was an article recently about companies in this, private companies that have been the fastest to go to 100 million in revenue, in recurring revenue, and the top 3 are all AI companies now. But if you look at the segments in which they operate, it's very much consumer or mid-market enterprises or prosumer goods. You will never really have enterprise products in that game in the same way, as you pointed out earlier, because of procurement and risk and all of those kinds of things, which is needed to actually get technology in. But once you've done the hard yards, I think, if we say, okay, on the ground when FinSt is being used, what are the gains? And to your point, how much of it is cost cutting? How much of it is productivity? I think the number one way to think about it is if you're let's say you work at a long only fund and you're a portfolio manager or an analyst covering X space. Ultimately, the way you drive revenue is by making smarter decisions than other people, right? And I'll use a really simple example here just to illustrate it off. I cover 15 names. I'm making buy, sell, hold decisions on them. I'm doing a lot of work for that. I'm reading all the time. I'm looking at earnings. I'm looking at filings. I'm looking at sell side research. I'm looking at what could go wrong. What are the risk factors here? If I'm on the credit side, maybe I'm really trying to protect downside risk. And so, if AI lets you answer the questions you have faster, one, it means you can ask more questions. And if you ask more questions, you can know more about places and companies faster. So I have a great quote from one of the analysts who was using us. He said, the biggest waste of time is not realizing something's a waste of time. I'm researching these 5 names, and only 2 weeks in do I find there's some big red flag there that I hadn't seen before. If I can start by saying, FinSt, go away for these 20 names and tell me if any of these red flags exist, it automatically gets rid of 5 of the names and says, these don't match your thesis, only focus on these 5. Then not only have I saved time not exploring those other names, I can use that time to go further afield and do more research and do more coverage. So I think from the asset management side, one of those metrics is something like AUM per analyst, where I think that's a real concrete KPI of saying, okay, you manage $5 billion. How many analysts have you got covering the names for that? If you were raising a fund that was going to triple AUM, could you do that without increasing the number of analysts? Well, maybe you can, because AI will come in and a lot of the initial screening, initial work will be done by a bot. And then I think the real important question that everybody asks is, well, how do I know that what it's producing is accurate? How do I know that the information coming in is accurate? And those are hard questions, which is why we're trying to solve them, because if they were easy questions, they would just be solved, right? Exactly, so how do we get the right data into these models? We buy a lot of data from the big kind of data companies to augment these models with real-time data. So, their knowledge about a company isn't just historic, it's what's happening right now, it's live market feeds coming in, how we work on reliability, things like that. But that's sort of one small example I've given you, say, in a long-only fund. I think the same applies even if it's, to not stuff FinSt is doing, right? If you were building marketing software, if you said AI is going to work with my marketing teams to, even for Angton Star, put out content faster, and it's going to draft the content, you should be very clear, and there are tools like that out there, but then it's kind of the onus on the user to track the KPIs. Okay, well, the AI-generated content, what's our engagement rate like? Is that higher or is that lower?
Yeah, how's that continuing?
Is it that, yes, AI is putting more content out there, but when it's AI generated content, users don't engage with it. When I write the content, then users do engage with it. In which case, you could say, oh, AI is increasing efficiency because it puts content out there more, but it's not getting you what you want.
Yeah, exactly. Which comes down to the productivity.
And so I think that the time save is a good initial thing. Oh, I saved 10 minutes drafting this piece of content, or 10 minutes. I saved 10 minutes on writing my initiation template. But the real question is the end impact and the second order impact. That meant I covered 25 names and I found an investment idea, or I found a needle in a haystack that I would completely have missed. Or, it wrote this marketing copy for me, but AI actually came up with this really catchy hook for the podcast that has increased conversions or increased engagement and click-throughs. I think that's what you need to be measuring. And so if people measure the wrong thing, then you're optimizing the wrong thing.
And it's always come down to measure what matters.
Exactly.
When you look at this sort of thing, and actually the whole concept of data anywhere, and this is a very abstract sort of link, so humour me for a moment.
No, absolutely.
But I've just been reading a book about called How to Win the Premier League, and it's about the data science team behind Liverpool Football Club when they went through to do that, and it was a really fascinating view of how data can be used for it. But the overwhelm for me on that was how people in other teams at the highest, we're talking multiple millions of pounds invested, billions of pounds invested into things which have a material impact on livelihoods and everything else behind it, and survival of clubs, was based on measuring the wrong data and measuring the wrong thing. And actually, when you get that right, you have enormous productivity gain to be able to punch above your weight and win leagues, etc. within it. Now, flip that back into our sector in financial services, and again, it's about making sure that the right data is measured. That going from AI speaks from hallucinations that are incorrect are worked on and improved. But realistically, it's just like we've always done that. That's what we're looking for, and we'll look for the data that supports our theories and all that sort of stuff around it. And this is what I think is really interesting when we come back to that efficiency versus productivity piece. Is there is a danger that I think is inherent in this thing, that when you talk about being able to get that much data and avoid that sort of lost time into it, you don't utilise that time by doing more. You just become someone who does the same, just easier.
Yeah.
And that to me is when companies get that right, when individuals get that right, and realise actually, look, we can do twice as much from this sort of thing. And that to me is where it moves from into a really exciting realm of productivity increases, which is the only way I think we solve the chronic productivity issue that we're having full stop at the moment, but also to really regain the margins that businesses need to thrive like they used to 15, 20 years ago.
No, I completely agree. And I think that, the hallucination point, again, you made is a good example of that, of what do you measure, right? There's so much talk about hallucinations. We'll talk about it as well. We talk about what our approach is and how it's different. But again, it really depends on what the question being asked is. In financial services...
Ask better questions.
Yeah, in financial services, the cost to being wrong is very high.
Yeah.
Right? And even with facts and figures especially.
Yeah.
If again, back to the marketing example, if it was drafting LinkedIn copy for you, and it made a simple mistake or it didn't sound right, you would just go in and edit it.
Yeah.
But if you asked your AI, hey, give me, recurring revenue or subscriber counts for these 5 businesses over the last 5 years, and it made up one of the numbers. That's terrible. You should know better. But are you going to actually go and check all of them?
Yeah.
And so in financial services, an AI saying, I don't know, is actually really valuable. Here are the 10 numbers I'm sure of. I don't know the others.
Yeah.
You can go find them yourself.
Yeah.
And so an I don't know is way better than a mistake. And it's almost as good as a, yes, I know the answer, and this is the correct answer.
Yeah.
And so that's what you should be evaluating. Can these models say they don't know? Can they tell you when they need human help? And I think, that links to the point you've been making on also general productivity. It's, let's look 2 or 3 steps down. If this is what the model does, as you say, what will the human do with the time that's left? How will that increase revenue for the company? Are you measuring AUM per analyst, as I said? Are you measuring coverage per analyst? Are you measuring... you can't just measure time taken to do the work. Because you don't know what they're doing with the other time.
Yeah, exactly,
I was saying this to you earlier, somebody, a senior exec at a bank, gave me this example earlier of if you had AI software writing emails, and then you look at the KPIs, do you want number of emails sent to go up or go down? Because they could be more efficient and write more emails, but you really want people sending more emails instead of doing work?
Exactly,
and so you don't even know whether the number is measuring the right thing. And so the right question to ask them is there a way of saying, okay, if you can write your emails faster that you really need to, what are you using that other time for? How is that driving revenue?
That's the part. It's all got to go into a workflow that makes sense, right? And when you're looking at people who aren't just saying, right, how can we pinch this or pinch that? It's what can we do and how can it become the whole strategy? And the AI strategy becomes important.
And the workflow point you made is really important as well. We try and sell it in workflow based. If this is your workflow right now for writing an initiation template, this is how we will automate 70% of it, and here's where your magic normally comes in, where we don't want to automate it, because that's you as the PM or the analyst.
Augmentation, not replacement.
Yes, exactly. There's a reason they're doing the job. It's because they have sector experience, so they have industry experience, so they have some knowledge that nobody else has. At the end of the day, that's their alpha. They don't want to give that to the model, and they shouldn't give it to the model. The AI should be doing the bits that it can do, that help you, not that are trying to replicate your intelligence or your value add on top of it. Because if the model did do that, then every fund would say the same thing. They'd say, well, this is what my model said, I'm going to go and do that. And so human decision making or taste or additions on top of the model, I think, are actually more important in the age of AI. Right? Because we can all do now the basic stuff. We can get that automated for us.
So now the skill comes in.
Now the skill comes in, right? If we all know, it's like with with data back in the day, or with, streaming or any of these technologies, it democratizes what people have access to.
Yeah.
So suddenly, if you're a film critic, you're seeing the same movies everyone else is seeing because they can sit at home and see them. The way you write your articles, the way you analyze things, what you see in those movies that others miss.
Yeah.
That's what's really important now. The content's there. Everybody's got access to content. Everybody can generate content.
Yeah. I think that there's loads to unpack with what we just said. I want to focus in on something that's just popped into my head as you were talking there, which goes back to the whole concept of sponsors internally and having the MDs on site,
Yes.
having the right people in the bank who are, or asset manager, or wherever, the institution, shall we say, who are keen to sponsor this and get through from it. Now, with all of the upside of that, and the all the concepts of not wanting to be left behind, there are enormous challenges around it at the same sort of stage. And I have spoken to a number of different skeptics within institutions who are business people by trade.
Yeah.
And now, if you're in a bank and you're a business person, you've got an interest in technology. 25 years ago, it was there's the tech guys who are our cost. Let us keep doing what we're doing. That's completely changed over the last quarter of a century. In a really encouraging way, but there are still people there who I think are at the top of the industry who will always look for the problem zone. And that can be going back to crypto, as you mentioned beforehand. That can be going back to cloud. That can be going back to blockchain technology, wherever it is. They are in teen speak these days. The haters out there who want people to fail around it, right? So I think the biggest issues that come back to what we've spoken about before, this compliance regulation sort of phase, but also this ability for it to be, and I use this phrase a lot because it comes directly from the mouth of one of these naysayers, in terms of it being approximately right as opposed to exactly right. And obviously in financial services, everything needs to be exactly right because you mentioned before, the slippage of numbers has catastrophic consequences to it. So when you've got people there who are torn between wanting to be pioneering and wanting to improve things and wanting to reduce cost and increase productivity and all those golden things, but hamstrung by this conservative terror and fear, predominantly rising, through their own welfare as much as anything else. As someone who's selling into that space, tell me a little bit about how you become the voice of reason.
Yeah, it's a really, really good point, and I think some of it just comes down to good old-fashioned practices, which is the product has to speak for itself.
Yeah.
If they're a naysayer, ask them, okay, we get that you don't believe us. What are 5 questions that if we answered, you would be convinced?
Yeah.
Or let's do a live demo.
Yeah.
What are 20 things you want to test if the AI can do?
Yeah.
And I think
it must be beautiful for you just to see this sort of
and I think when it doesn't work, because there's enough times the demo hasn't worked, that's good for us as well, right? Because we've heard it straight from the horse's mouth of what they need solved that would convince them.
Yeah.
And I think, especially in a world where everybody's doing PR.
Yeah.
You look at every startup and they'll claim they're the best in the world. Sometimes you just got to get your hands on the product, play with it, and see if that convinces you. Because how many of these execs are reading about DeepSeek and O1 models and all of this in the FT every morning? What percentage are actually going home, opening up, ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever, and saying, "Let me play with the latest model"? It's a much smaller fraction. But I think you just have to play with it yourself. So I think that's the simplest answer in one way, right? Is if you're a naysayer, really try and break the product. Just keep trying it till it breaks, and then you know the limits of what it can do. And if you come back and think, well, it's not ready to work with an analyst as yet, but maybe it's at least as good as an intern, then at least you can see the pace of progress. And I think in many cases it's well beyond an intern or an analyst in terms of what it's able to do and the speed of things it's able to do. But I think we're seeing less and less of that. I think there are naysayers, of course, but most of them are not coming from a sort of
that's the thing.
and they're not coming from a negative place. They're coming from the kind of
allow me to use this.
And I also think it's needed, right? You need people in an organization who question jumping on the hype.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, your strategy will never be consistent. You'll keep doing different things based on whatever the flavor of the month is.
Yeah.
So I think it comes from a good place. It comes from, are we 100% sure we want to spend all this money on this tool?
Yeah.
And then it's our job as a startup to convince them. It's not their job to be convinced. We need to really sort of pound on the door and say, look how much value you can get from these tools. Look how well designed they are. I think the other point is just some amount of humility. And kind of, as you said, how do you be a voice of reason? I think humility is a good word, because if you've got an MD in an investment bank who's been doing this for 25 years, what they can't have or won't like is, some sort of SF tech bro coming in and saying, everything you're doing is wrong. Here's how you actually do banking. My AI bot will do it for you. Because they're going to say, well, I've done this for 25 years. And in many cases, their roles are, at that point, very client-facing. They're not sitting and making the models themselves every day. They've got teams of people doing that. They're going and winning new business and talking to clients and talking to existing clients in relationship building. That stuff is not going to change with AI. So what you're really saying to them is, hey, when you give a piece of work to your team, because you need it turned around before a client pitch, what if that was done more efficiently and there were guardrails in place and it was done in a more process-driven manner but faster, and here's an AI that doesn't need to sleep and it can work through the night and do it for you? Wouldn't that make your life better? What you're not saying to them is everything you know about banking is wrong. I think that's one of the problems that we have as startups, is often people come from the tech world and think they know best. And then they can kind of go into a bank and tell them how it should be run. And I think that's probably the thing that is most off-putting to kind of senior execs.
You've hit the nail on the head there, and I think that to me is something. One of the I was talking to you about this show beforehand, and 500 odd episodes, etc., and the amount of people we've spoken to, and I'm always looking for the sort of trends of what where you see people succeed and go on to build great things, and people who don't necessarily get to where they could go with despite the sort of vision that they may have. And I think you've just hit the nail on the head where people are coming from a tech perspective. You get so excited about the technology and the potential of it that you end up sort of giving the solution to someone that they don't necessarily need or isn't that important to them, or being so evangelical about the product that you don't take feedback from other people around where that goes. I think it's a really interesting sort of viewpoint of how people can look at that and say, right, the companies I love are the ones who are so obsessed with the customer's problem and how they can articulate how they can help with that. And I know it sounds really obvious, but it's actually relatively rare about how you can deliver that. And it comes down to that sort of founding team. So it's a good place to sort of round back to and come back to FinSt AI, because I love the sort of journey you've been on before. As I said at the start, some really impressive raises and partners. You're with Hoxton Ventures, I know already, and going through various rounds of seed right now. You've done something there from backgrounds, as you said at the start, from Google, from Morgan Stanley, etc. It's a big change for you to come from those institutional environments. And everyone knows how cool and creative and brilliant they are as a background, but it's a very different world to then suddenly being 12 people in a room taking on the world, etc., all that sort of thing. So tell me how you're getting that bit right on the sort of entrepreneurial journey that you're now on from being part of some of the biggest companies in the world.
No, thank you. It's a good point, and actually a lot of our team come from big institutions. And I think that's a real positive, because we've seen one way of doing it, but we've all also left. And that's because we think there's another way of doing it. So, somebody on our team was an equity researcher at Aviva for many years earlier, and so has done the job. Somebody on the team was at JP Morgan doing AI rollout there, and so has seen what that's like at a large institution and has taken lessons from that. And I think a few things, right? One, you realize you have to do everything yourself. There's where HR and where IT and where the technical side and where sales and where business development and we come on podcasts, so we're doing everything, which is great. I think I think you also just learn hustle, or hopefully you have some of it, but you just have to hustle all the time, right? I think there's...
Did you know that? Did you see yourself as an entrepreneur in waiting, or was it something there which you just got drawn to? Or?
Yes and no.
And how's that learning come from you?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to do it, but I always said I'd do it when the idea was good enough that it felt right.
Perfect,
and so there were quite a few ideas I'd played with just generally over the last few years before founding FinSt, where it just didn't feel like it was either the timing was right or the market was there, or the other one, which is why am I building this? There's 100 other people who could do this. When I bought a flat during COVID, I was like, somebody should really build a better way of buying houses because I can't deal with all this paperwork. But that wasn't necessarily my job. I was just hoping somebody else did it. I wasn't passionate enough about it. Whereas with this, I think we saw, look, there's all this great tech and AI that a lot of us on the team have worked on, and then there's all these real problems in financial services that other people on the team have worked on. And then there's this gulf in the middle where the tech people talk about what the cool tech can do, and they say it's PhD level intelligence. And the banking folks are going, well, how do you actually get the right data in? How is it up to date? How is the data real time? How is it going to get through my model risk management and my compliance team? And so our job is to be that middle. And I think one of the lessons for me has been hiring, try and hire the best people, hire people who have worked in parts of the world that are very different to what you worked on. Because all the ideas can't come from me, and all the solutions can't come from me. People need to take ownership. So I think that's been good learning. It's very hard, right? I don't know how we think we're doing well at the moment. We'll see how that goes. We're working with some great clients and kind of tier one investment banks and asset managers, but you need to do that repeatedly and keep landing more and more and more accounts.
The consistency of it.
And then doing that in a way where you don't burn all your money and you can scale revenue at the same time while scaling headcount.
There's also good people around you to help with that.
Yeah, right? Exactly. And I think it's having the right advisors, it's having the right family support and all of that, and finding ways to switch off, which is very hard, but sometimes you have to do that. But I don't think there really is a secret. I mean, you can wake up on Monday morning and think you're going to be $1 billion company, and then on Wednesday think everything's broken. And I think
welcome to my world.
Yeah, and so you've obviously been sort of building a business for 3 decades now. You know it better than I do. I think I found that I need to find a way for me to stay calm and centered. Because the team gets its. I think teams often take steer from what leadership is doing. If leadership is frantic and one day going, we're a success, let's all go for drinks. And next day going, everything's broken, you need to pull an all-nighter. Then it's not a very stable work environment. And so I think, making it like a welcoming place for people to be, but also saying, look, we have to push hard and we have to work very hard to earn the right to be a big company. We're small relatively in the grand scheme of things.
But you've got a great mythology of being exposed to Google at that sort of stage of your career alongside it, and Google have obviously been the poster company of what a great environment can look like at various stages, and obviously it's very different from when it was that punchy startup to where it was now. But I think some of those sort of things can be great in terms of the maturation of where everything happens.
I completely agree. I think when that's been true generally of Google, but then also DeepMind on the AI side. When I joined them, there were about 200 people. By the time I left, there were about 2,500 or something. I think one thing that's consistent with tech companies, whether they're a 5-person startup or a Google, is if you look at when ChatGPT happened, everybody wrote these articles about how Google was dead. And so you can be $1 trillion company and still not have convinced everybody that you're, that you're good and you're fine. And since then, they've done very well, and I think stock price is up 30%, and before the last few weeks. And so I think that never stops. You're always only as good as your next idea or your next trade or your next client. I think that has felt very similar, obviously at a much smaller scale when you're starting, but you could have done all these great things and then you've got to raise money, but you're only as good as your next idea and your next pitch and all of that, which is, I don't know, it's also fun, right? It's a good challenge. It's good to do things that are keeping you on your toes. I think for me, the biggest thing is, I wake up every morning and I'm really excited about this, and I'm really excited about what the meetings are and what the team is doing and what how we're actually doing things and that we're shipping things quickly and that we're being productive. And I think that's good because, even in a big company like Google, where, yes, they're generally more agile than, a 100-year-old large enterprise or something in manufacturing, and they're being on it, things can still feel slow because there's now processes and there's 100,000 people and there's all of these things to do.
Yeah.
Whereas, with a startup, you can look at it with a fresh pair of eyes. It's funny, I look at decisions we made a year ago and go, boy, that was a stupid decision. Glad we made it through. So there's always be hindsight.
You've got to make some stupid decisions along the journey, right? So let's talk about that. And it's a great place to finish this. And I've loved the conversations. And
likewise, absolutely.
As I knew I would. But let's finish with FinSt AI 2025 and beyond. I can see and sense the sort of enthusiasm, the excitement, the passion for what you're doing and the subject matter that you're involved in, but also the excitement of where it can go and what can happen. So tell us a little bit about what's expected, what you're excited about, what we can expect to see from FinSt AI.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been slightly quiet with our website and things like that while we do a lot of work in the background. We raised a second round last year that we've not announced as yet, and so we'll do some PR about that. We've landed some kind of quite big for us client accounts, as I said, with tier 1 institutions. There'll be more coming on that in the next year. For people who are listening from either the asset management world or the investment banking world, we think there's a lot of real problems that we can help solve, and do that in a way where we know how to get through compliance and regulation and how to, we've kind of earned our chops on that side and how to roll this out, how to do change management, how to do that boring stuff. So I think you should expect to hear from us. We're always hiring, so you'll hear lots of updates there, kind of client wins and kind of big moves there, things about fundraising, and more about the product as well, whether that's kind of, we'll keep expanding the use cases we're covering, the kinds of tasks it's very good at. I think what underpins that for us always is great tech and great AI and the kind of, building AI agents and AI models. And we find that very exciting, though we realize that's less relevant for a banker necessarily, but for the tech people, we can talk about that. And I think, we'll generally, our first year, December 23 to 24 was a lot of doing and kind of staying quiet while we build up the reps there. And I think
the classic stealth go.
Yeah, we'll be a bit more out there this year.
Yeah, well, that's it. So let's hit, and it starts here. So
it starts here. Thanks so much for having me.
Very good to have you on. For people who are watching it, want to get in touch, want to find out more.
Yeah, absolutely. FinSt.ai is the website. I'm on Sid at FinSt.ai. I'll try and reply to every email. I normally do.
Good man. Listen, lovely to have you on. Good luck with it all. It sounds fantastic.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been really great.
To explore it all on the show today. We'll have you back soon, I'm sure, to find out the next phase.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Sid. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you on the next episode of FinTech Focus TV. Thanks a lot.